For more than a century, the world believed in a single certainty, that no matter what happened, one nation would always lead, one currency would always dominate, one military would always intervene. Empires before America rose with force. America rose with systems. And for decades, those systems controlled the world. But history has a pattern that never fails. The moment an empire believes it has escaped history, history begins to move against it. The American century did not collapse overnight. It began to fade quietly, long before most people were willing to notice. The idea of the American century was not born from propaganda, it was born from reality. In the aftermath of the Second World War, the global order lay in ruins. Europe was physically destroyed, economically exhausted, and politically fractured. Old empires that had ruled for centuries, Britain, France, the Netherlands, were no longer capable of maintaining global dominance. Their wealth was drained, their populations exhausted, and their legitimacy questioned by the very colonies that once sustained them. Into this vacuum stepped the United States. Unlike previous empires, America emerged from the war stronger than it entered. Its cities were untouched, its factories were expanded, its currency was trusted, its military had proven decisive. For the first time in history, a single nation possessed economic power, military reach, and ideological confidence simultaneously. The American century was not simply about power, it was about control of the rules. America shaped the post-war world through institutions rather than occupation. The dollar became the backbone of global trade. American-designed institutions governed finance, development, and security. Nations did not merely cooperate with the United States, they depended on it. This dependence created stability, but it also created imbalance. And imbalance, history shows, never lasts. America understood something earlier empires learned too late. Colonies breed resistance. Occupation creates enemies. So instead of flags and governors, America built alliances, bases, and systems. NATO replaced colonial garrisons. The IMF and World Bank replaced imperial treasuries. Hollywood, technology, and media replaced cultural coercion. This was empire in its most advanced form. Countries were not forced to obey. They chose to participate because the system benefited them, or at least, it appeared to. American power became invisible, normalized, and global. It was no longer seen as domination, but as order. Yet this system carried a hidden weakness. The more the world relied on American leadership, the more America became responsible for maintaining stability everywhere. Every crisis became America's problem. Every conflict demanded American involvement, and every involvement increased the cost of leadership. Empires collapse, not when they lose control, but when control becomes too expensive to sustain. History has a word for the stage America entered in the late 20th and early 21st century: imperial overstrats. This is the moment when an empire's commitments exceed its capacity to manage them effectively. Rome experienced it when its borders expanded faster than its ability to defend them. Britain experienced it when its navy could no longer police the entire globe. The Soviet Union experienced it when military spending consumed its economy. America entered this phase gradually. Military bases multiplied across continents. Security guarantees expanded. Interventions became routine. From Vietnam to the Middle East, America found itself fighting wars not for survival, but for credibility. Victory became unclear. Exit strategies disappeared. Costs accumulated silently. What made this phase dangerous was not failure, but normalization. Endless war became ordinary. Trillions were spent without decisive outcomes. The public grew distant from the consequences. Empires survive crises, but they do not survive permanent emergency. Every empire rests on an economic foundation. For America, that foundation was the dollar. As the world's reserve currency, the dollar gave the United States extraordinary power. It could borrow endlessly, finance wars without immediate collapse, and impose sanctions that reshaped global behavior. No empire before had ever possessed such financial leverage, but reserve currencies depend on trust, not force. History shows this clearly. The Roman denarius collapsed when it was debased. The British pound lost dominance when Britain's economy could no longer support its global role. America's challenge is not collapse, it is credibility. As global trade diversified and emerging economies grew, the world slowly began to reduce dependence on a single financial center. This shift is subtle, not dramatic. Empires rarely notice economic decline until it becomes political decline. The signs appear first in debt, inequality, and structural imbalance. By the time they are acknowledged, the foundation has already weakened. History is unforgiving on one point. Empires collapse internally before they fall externally. When political unity erodes, external leadership becomes impossible. America's greatest challenge today is not a foreign rival, but internal fragmentation. Trust in institutions has declined. Political polarization has hardened. Consensus has vanished. Rome experienced this when elites and masses turned against each other. Britain experienced it when imperial identity clashed with domestic reform. The Soviet Union experienced it when ideology lost legitimacy. Internal division weakens decision-making, delays reform, and magnifies every external threat. An empire divided at home cannot maintain order abroad. Power becomes reactive rather than strategic, and once that happens, decline accelerates. The American century did not end because America collapsed. It began to end because the world changed. New centers of power emerged, not strong enough to replace America individually, but collectively capable of limiting its dominance. China rose economically. Russia asserted military influence. Regional powers pursued autonomy. The global South demanded alternatives. Multipolar worlds are unstable by nature. They resist domination. They reward balance, not supremacy. America was built to lead a unipolar world. Adapting to multipolar reality requires restraint, compromise, and humility, qualities empires struggle to embrace. History shows that no empire voluntarily relinquishes dominance. They are forced to adapt by circumstance. America is now in that moment. The most dangerous phase of any empire is not collapse. It is denial. When leaders and societies refuse to acknowledge limits, they compensate with force, pressure, and control. Rome tightened borders. Britain delayed decolonization. The Soviet Union doubled down on repression. America today faces the same temptation, to enforce order rather than adapt to change, to preserve dominance rather than redefine leadership. History shows this choice determines the nature of decline. The American century is not ending with chaos. It is ending with resistance. Resistance from a world that no longer accepts a single center of power. Every empire eventually faces a moment when its greatest strength becomes its greatest vulnerability. For the United States, that strength has been the dollar. More than tanks, aircraft carriers, or missiles, the dollar has been the true weapon of American dominance. It allowed the United States to fund wars without immediate sacrifice, to run deficits without collapse, and to shape global behavior through sanctions rather than invasion. But history has never allowed a single currency to dominate forever. The Roman denarius once controlled Mediterranean trade until it was slowly devalued. The British pound ruled global finance during the height of the British Empire until war debt and economic exhaustion weakened it. These currencies did not collapse overnight. They faded as trust eroded. The dollar now faces a similar moment. Not a crash, not a sudden replacement, but a gradual loss of exclusivity. Countries are experimenting with alternative trade mechanisms. Bilateral agreements bypass traditional systems. Gold reserves quietly increase. None of this is rebellion. It is insurance. And when nations begin to insure themselves against the system, it signals that faith is no longer absolute. Empires rarely recognize this shift until it becomes irreversible. One of the greatest misunderstandings of modern geopolitics is the belief that the American century will end only if the United States is defeated militarily. History suggests the opposite. Empires rarely fall because someone conquers them. They fall because maintaining dominance becomes more costly than surrendering it. Rising powers understand this lesson well. They do not seek direct confrontation. They seek endurance. They invest in alternatives rather than attacks. Infrastructure, trade networks, regional influence, and technological independence matter more than military victory. This strategy does not provoke war. It slowly changes the environment in which power operates. Rome was not destroyed by a single enemy. Britain was not overthrown by a rival empire. The Soviet Union collapsed without invasion. The same logic applies today. America does not need to lose a war to lose primacy. It only needs to lose relevance in shaping outcomes. And that process is already underway. As direct dominance weakens, empires turn to indirect methods. Proxy wars become tools of delay rather than victory. They allow empires to project power without committing fully, to influence outcomes without assuming responsibility. But history shows that proxy wars are signs of insecurity, not strength. The United States has increasingly relied on indirect conflict. Support replaces occupation. Pressure replaces negotiation. Influence replaces authority. This creates a dangerous illusion of control. Conflicts multiply. Outcomes become unpredictable. Allies pursue their own agendas. Enemies adapt. Rome relied on mercenaries and client states during its decline. Britain relied on local rulers and divided regions. The result was not stability, but fragmentation. Proxy wars rarely preserve empires. They accelerate exhaustion. No empire falls while its society remains unified and confident. Decline begins when internal divisions undermine external ambition. America today faces a level of polarization unseen in generations. Institutions are questioned. Authority is contested. Consensus is fragile. History shows this stage clearly. Rome struggled with elite corruption and popular unrest. Britain faced growing domestic pressure to abandon imperial commitments. The Soviet Union collapsed under economic stagnation and ideological fatigue. In each case, the empire lost the social cohesion required to sustain global leadership. An empire that cannot agree on its own direction, cannot impose order abroad. Resources become politically contested. Sacrifice becomes unpopular. Leadership becomes reactive. This internal limit is often more decisive than any external rival. The American century depended on a unipolar world. One center, one rulemaker, one guarantor. That world no longer exists. Power is now distributed across regions and domains. Economic influence, military capability, technological leadership, and political legitimacy are no longer concentrated. Multipolar systems resist domination. They reward flexibility and balance. Attempts to enforce supremacy trigger resistance rather than compliance. This is why the modern world feels unstable. It is not collapsing, it is rebalancing. America's challenge is structural, not temporary. The system it built has outgrown the conditions that sustained it. History shows that no empire has successfully managed a multipolar world alone. Adaptation is the hardest task for any empire. Success creates identity. Identity creates rigidity. Empires become trapped by their own narratives. Rome believed in eternal rule. Britain believed in civilizing mission. The Soviet Union believed in ideological destiny. America believes in extiliism. This belief fueled its rise. It now complicates its adjustment. Accepting limits feels like surrender. Redefining leadership feels like defeat. History shows that empires that adapt slowly decline gracefully. Empires that resist adaptation collapse painfully. The American century faces this choice now. Adapt to shared leadership or enforce a system that no longer fits reality. History never leaves a vacuum unfilled. When one empire declines, the world does not return to chaos. It reorganizes. After Rome, regional powers emerged. After Britain, new institutions formed. After the Cold War, globalization expanded. The world after the American century will not belong to a single empire. It will be fragmented, competitive, and negotiated. Power will be regional. Influence will be conditional. Stability will depend on cooperation rather than dominance. This transition will be uncomfortable, but it is not unprecedented. History has passed through many such moments. The end of an empire rarely feels like an ending. It feels like confusion, like tension, like constant crisis without resolution. People living inside empires do not recognize decline because decline does not announce itself. It unfolds slowly, unevenly, and quietly. The American century was real. It reshaped finance, security, culture, and politics on a global scale. Its influence will not disappear, but its dominance has already faded. Not because America failed, but because history moved forward. Empires do not fall when they are hated. They fall when they are no longer needed in the same way. The question facing the world is not whether the American century has ended. It is what kind of world will emerge from its shadow.